Beginnings in New York. My name is Madison Turner, and at 27, I had just landed my first real job as an associate attorney at a prestigious law firm in Manhattan. Walking through those revolving doors every morning, I felt a surge of pride mixed with butterflies in my stomach. Everything in this city was larger than life. The skyscrapers casting shadows over bustling streets, the endless pulse of ambition, and the energy that seeped into your bones, whether you wanted it or not. New York had always been my dream, from the days when I grew up watching law dramas on TV in Cleveland, to the moment I stepped off the bus 3 years ago with 2 suitcases and a restless heart. My first few days at the firm were a whirlwind of introductions, new systems, and figuring out the subtle politics of the office. The scent of coffee mingled with the low hum of determination as everyone hustled through never-ending stacks of documents. Even the walls seemed to whisper stories of victories, losses, and relentless perseverance. I was both intimidated and electrified, thrilled to be starting my career where legends were made. Yet, behind all the excitement, there was a quiet pressure too. I was acutely aware that at any moment, one small mistake could shadow my ambitions. That fear drove me to work late, double-check every file, and rehearse every argument in front of my bathroom mirror. I wanted to belong here, to prove that a girl from a modest Midwest family could hold her own among these razor-sharp legal minds. But, as I'd soon discover, New York wasn't just about victory or defeat inside the courtroom. It was about trust, loyalty, and the deep, unspoken rules that governed not only the city, but the people within it. And somewhere, in those first long weeks, the seeds of my most defining professional ordeal were quietly being sown, waiting to test just how resilient I really was. The trustworthy colleague. In those chaotic first months at the firm, I felt as if I was swimming upstream against a current only the city could provide. No matter how long I stayed at my desk, or how many emails I churned out, there was always a sense that the true challenges hid somewhere beneath the surface, just out of view. That's when I met Amanda Carter. Amanda was 3 years older than me, 30, bright, and possessing a kind of easy confidence I envied. She had grown up outside Philadelphia, landed her job at Harlow and Reed after making partner track at a smaller boutique firm, and seemed to know everyone in the building by name. From the very start, Amanda brought warmth into rooms that often felt cold and transactional. She was the kind of colleague who always remembered to ask how my parents were settling into their retirement back in Kansas, or if I needed help finding good coffee near the office. She swore by an obscure espresso bar in the East Village and made it a ritual to drag me there at least once a month. It didn't take long before Amanda became my anchor. There was something deeply reassuring about her presence, especially whenever we shared the same case files or strategized in early morning meetings. She let me in on office lore, the best ways to impress certain partners, the subtle art of surviving all-night work sessions, what not to say at the annual firm gala, and when to politely decline an urgent Friday evening project invitation. Most importantly, she taught me that there was room for camaraderie and trust, even in a culture that thrived on competition. We developed our own rituals, daily lunches at the salad bar around the corner, late-night takeout at our desks, inventing sessions in the tiny break room when a deposition had gone sideways. Amanda always had the best advice for diffusing tension or sharpening arguments. I valued her opinion almost as much as I valued her friendship. At times, she felt more like an older sister than a coworker, quick with encouragement when my self-doubt crept in, and even quicker to call me out if I let myself get too comfortable. Through small acts of kindness, in 1,000 shared moments, Amanda became the calm in my storm. Every day, I felt more at home in this towering, unpredictable city, because I knew if I needed help, whether it was a last-minute citation or just someone to laugh with after a tough day, Amanda would be there, ready as ever. Trust was hard-won in the legal world, but I handed it to Amanda willingly, quietly grateful for her friendship and believing, with all my heart, that she wanted the best for me. My first case. If there is a precise moment when everything changed, it has to be the Monday morning in late July when I was called into Mr. Gaines's office. The rain that day hit the office windows in relentless waves, blurring the Manhattan skyline and muffling the usual city symphony. My heart raced as I stood in the polished hallway, nervously smoothing the front of my navy blue suit and running through every possible reason I might be summoned by an equity partner. Before even finishing my morning coffee, Mr. Gaines greeted me with that signature stern gaze that masked a certain wisdom. "Madison, I want you to prep and help first chair the Advantech lawsuit," he said, without much preamble. My mouth went dry. The Advantech case wasn't just another corporate dispute. It was a potentially precedent-setting matter concerning complex intellectual property, with millions in damages at stake and the reputation of the firm virtually on the line. You could have knocked me over with a feather, but I nodded, told him I was honored, and walked back to my office in half a daze. As the reality of the assignment settled on my shoulders, I felt the familiar twinge of self-doubt begin to creep in, whispering that maybe this was too much, too soon. But excitement quickly took over. The very first day I reviewed the files, I was hit with the gravity of what I'd been handed. Obscure patent details, a lineup of expert witnesses, correspondence that could twist either way in court, and a mountain of digital evidence waiting to be organized, scrutinized, and rendered court-ready. I rolled up my sleeves and dove in, brushing up the fundamentals I'd almost forgotten in the crush of everyday work: how to parse technical jargon, how to anticipate opposing counsel's cross-examination, how to think 5 chess moves ahead, even when I barely understood the pieces yet. Amanda, ever the dependable mentor, took me aside and announced, "This is yours. You run with it. I'll back you when you need." But no one gets their shot more than once. Her confidence was a lifeline, anchoring me amid waves of anxiety. Nights blurred into early mornings, takeout containers stacked beside printouts, as I worked late at my desk, chasing down precedents, poring over depositions, and coordinating with expert witnesses, some of whom seemed intent on tormenting me over every technicality of their field. Each day, I faced a fresh puzzle. A critical memo turned up missing from the archives. I'd chase it down through the firm's labyrinthine file room. A tech consultant got cold feet about testifying. I'd organize a Zoom call and talk him off the ledge, channeling a mix of lawyerly persuasion and sheer stubbornness I never knew I possessed. I started to understand that being a lawyer here was more than legal prowess. It was stamina, tenacity, grace under fire, and a willingness to face the things that scared me most. All the while, Amanda was there, sometimes hovering anxiously at my office door, sometimes dropping a sarcastic remark when she caught me eating dinner straight from a styrofoam cup, sometimes delivering insights that only a seasoned player could offer. She helped me navigate office politics and the lateral moves others pulled to sidetrack my momentum. I never felt alone, not truly. If anything, I felt emboldened by her faith in me. The pretrial prep was grueling. Each day, there were hours of combing through technical diagrams and coding patterns, strategizing witness interviews, and prepping opening statements. Some nights, I stared at my laptop screen, eyes gritty and unfocused, reminding myself why I'd chosen this path in the first place. I had moments of supreme confidence, drafting a brilliant cross-examination, or nailing a conference call with our client's anxious board. Others, all I could think of was how easy it would be to make a crippling mistake, to let down both my team and, worst of all, myself. But what stands out most is that, for the first time in my life, I felt indispensable. There was a sense that everyone, Mr. Gaines, Amanda, even the other juniors, were counting on me. The weight was enormous, but with every long day and sleepless night, I learned to wear it a little better. By the time we walked into the pre-trial hearing, briefcases in hand, adrenaline thrumming, I had become someone new, sharper, bolder, and a hell of a lot more certain of my own voice. Whatever happened next, I was ready, or so I thought. Betrayal, unveiled. Sometimes, the lessons you never want are the ones that shape you most profoundly. The aftermath of the Bloomfield Larkin case taught me that. Here's how it happened. Honestly, it still feels raw thinking about it. After weeks and weeks of building our arguments, the day of the major hearing arrived. The office buzzed with careful confidence. Our team believed we had every angle covered, every weakness in the opposition mapped out. I had poured every bit of myself into that case, working 12-hour days, forgoing weekends, and letting the world outside shrink away. Lauren and I were more than just colleagues now. We were warriors in the trenches together. But when we got into the courtroom that day, the opposing side began skillfully dismantling our strategy, almost point by point. At first, I thought it was just bad luck, perhaps the other team outsmarting us. But then, their cross-examination revealed a level of insight into our arguments and evidence that seemed almost impossible, unless they'd known our game plan. The days that followed were brutal. Our client lost confidence in us. The partners were icy, and the firm's entire reputation was on wobbly ground. But I couldn't rest. Something in my gut told me this wasn't a coincidence. The final straw came when, late one evening, I reviewed the security logs for our internal document system. My heart thudded as I traced unauthorized after-hours access to key strategy files. The login belonged to someone I knew well, Lauren. At first, I refused to believe it. I spent nights tracing digital breadcrumbs, reviewing emails, questioning every memory. The truth was undeniable. Lauren had leaked select pieces of critical information to a recruiter representing our client's main competitor, hoping it would earn her a senior position there. The realization knocked the wind out of me. The person I trusted most, the one who taught me how to survive here, had sold me out for a faster climb up the ladder. My world contracted. I replayed every conversation, every late-night confession, questioning what had been real. Manuscripts of anger, confusion, and heartbreak scrolled through my mind as I began collecting evidence, emails, server logs, access histories. I moved quietly but deliberately, knowing that exposing her meant exposing every vulnerable piece of myself too. Finally, with an iron resolve I didn't know I had, I compiled everything and sat down with the managing partners. The fallout was swift and ugly. Lauren was confronted and, faced with incontrovertible proof, resigned in disgrace. The firm's leadership made it clear that while the violation was hers alone, it reflected a necessary lesson. Trust is rare and precious in this world. What stayed with me most was the blend of pain and grim relief. The reminder that even the most loyal mentor can be undone by ambition unchecked. The weeks after the revelation were a blur of statements, corporate apologies, wary glances, and the slow work of repairing professional scars. But in all that, I found a hard-won clarity and a voice I hadn't known before. Betrayal hurt, yes, but it didn't define me. The journey to uncover the truth. The weeks that followed the bombshell revelation were among the most challenging and transformative periods of my life. Looking back, I realize that the path to uncovering the truth wasn't just about exposing a betrayal. It was a crucible, burning away whatever naivete or blind loyalty I still possessed. I'm often asked how I didn't just break under the pressure, or why I didn't simply walk away when things got so ugly. The answer's complicated, but at its core, I needed to know. I needed to understand what really happened. And in some stubborn corner of my heart, I wanted to believe there might be another explanation. That people you trust wouldn't sacrifice you at the altar of career ambition. Every morning, the city woke with a kind of restless impatience. It mirrored the storm rumbling inside me. Gone were my rose-colored glasses. Now I saw Manhattan with a new caution, noticing the subtle maneuverings in both the office and the court. My days began earlier and ended later. I wasn't fueled by fear anymore, but by the need for answers, and maybe a little justice, too. The first thing I did was comb through digital evidence, determined to trace the leak down to its origin without making noise that might tip off anyone else involved. I spent hours after work in my cramped office, staring at glowing computer screens, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep. Alone under dim lights, I pieced together timelines and cross-referenced every strange login, every after-hours document access, every out-of-place email. I even started to make friends, real friends, with members of our IT department, realizing for the first time how crucial their quiet vigilance was to the firm's lifeblood. I created a meticulous map of every internal communication around the case. Email headers, metadata, sending times. Nothing was dismissed as insignificant. I flagged a series of late-night access times attached to a user ID that, on the surface, looked legitimate. Still, something was off. The pattern didn't match the real working hours of anyone on the litigation team. There's a unique thrill in the precise, technical kind of detective work, a blend of logic and determination that I'd never expected to need as a lawyer. But now, chasing the digital breadcrumbs, I was hooked. Meanwhile, in the physical world, office politics grew icy, whispers in corridors. Doors closed when I passed. My closest allies found dignified ways to distance themselves, afraid association with me might tarnish their own progress. I felt the sting acutely, but it also sharpened my resolve. If there was anything this betrayal had given me, it was the freedom to stop worrying so much about approval and finally fight for what mattered. I had to be careful. I couldn't trust just anyone. My circle shrunk to a handful. Amanda, who despite the cloud of suspicion hanging over us both, never wavered in her support. Mason, from IT, who appreciated my straightforwardness and supplied me with the logs I needed, always at arm's length, but never refusing a request. And Anita, a junior paralegal with a silent loyalty and a genius-level instinct for spotting inconsistencies in case documentation. We three, and sometimes four, when Amanda could safely show her face, became a sort of underground alliance, united by an ironclad purpose and, not for nothing, a shared fear of what would happen if we found more than we bargained for. At this point, every scrap of evidence I harvested brought me closer to the truth, but also closer to the possibility that the rot went deeper than even I had imagined. I questioned my memories, side glances at meetings, offhand comments in hallways, Emails that now seemed laced with double meanings. Paranoia, perhaps, but necessary. There's a saying in law: trust, but verify. After what I'd seen, I stopped trusting altogether, focusing only on what could be proven. I kept detailed notes of my progress in an encrypted file on my laptop. With each discovery, the case built itself. Tiny dots connecting in a pattern I couldn't yet name, but felt growing clearer each day. Eventually, it was Anita who noticed a strange repetition. Certain files had been opened, then immediately closed. After business hours, nearly every Wednesday for 2 months. The login details were always the same. The activity log at first looked like the work of a junior partner known for late nights. But when we checked keycard records for the building, he hadn't entered the office those evenings. Someone was using borrowed or stolen credentials. I started reviewing security tapes. Grainy, gray footage, punctuated by shadows, slipping in and out of frame. It was excruciatingly slow work. Days blurred as I watched the same stretch of hallway at 2 a.m. The dull hum of the monitor, a constant companion. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I saw a familiar figure. Lauren. She was careful, keeping her head down, moving as if she belonged there. But the camera caught enough. The distinct flash of her badge, the outline of her favorite coat, the way she paused at the file room as if weighing her next move. The realization landed hard. It wasn't a faceless enemy or a distant partner with no investment in me. It was Lauren, the person I'd trusted most. For a moment, I just stared at the paused video, a tightness in my chest as every loyal memory I had of her cracked open and spilled out. This wasn't just professional sabotage. It felt like a personal ambush, one meticulously plotted by someone I'd defended, confided in, and admired. If you've never been truly betrayed by someone you considered family, it's hard to explain that kind of heartbreak. Part of you wants to shout, to storm into her office and demand answers. But another, quieter part of you, a part that's grown up overnight, knows you have to get this right. I forced myself to be methodical, gathering evidence with a steadiness that surprised even me. I printed out the keycard records, compiled the video clips, annotated every unusual email from Lauren with dates and times, even making a flowchart for how the information leak traced directly back to her activities. Meanwhile, I played my part at work. I smiled at Lauren across meetings, let her offer guidance on research and witness prep, even accepted her invitations for after-work drinks. Every interaction took on a surreal edge. Was she pretending, too? Did she suspect I was onto her? I became a character in my own investigation, pretending everything was normal while beneath the surface, everything was shifting irrevocably. There were nights when I lay awake in my apartment, gripped with doubt and an overwhelming sense of loneliness. Had I missed signs before? Had I been so eager to find a mentor, a friend, that I ignored the small warnings? The tight-lipped annoyance when I earned praise from a partner. The way Lauren sometimes pressed me for my thoughts on legal strategy after hours. The little frown she never quite hid when she thought I wasn't looking. Even when I knew the truth, part of me desperately wanted to talk to her, to hear some explanation that would somehow make sense of the mess. But another, pragmatic part, knew the only path forward was to finish what I'd started. Document everything, deliver it to those who needed to see it, and step back for the inevitable fallout. Before bringing my evidence to the managing partners, I triple-checked every file. If I was wrong, even in the smallest way, I would not just lose my job, but destroy a reputation I'd barely begun to build. When I was satisfied, I asked Amanda and Mason to review the materials with me. They moved carefully through every line, cross-checking timestamps, badge access, email threads. Their reluctant silence was the most painful confirmation. If I'd ever doubted myself, I couldn't now. The final step was the hardest, handing my evidence to the firm's leadership. I scheduled a meeting with 2 of our senior partners, my hands sweating so much I left imprints on the folder cradled in my lap. When the moment came, I found my voice, clear, unwavering, and determined. I presented my findings, laid out my timeline, and let the evidence speak for itself. The partners didn't interrupt. When I finished, the room was silent, heavy with realization, and barely contained disappointment. They assured me that there would be an internal investigation and that confidentiality was paramount. I left the meeting wrung out, and both liberated and heartbroken. I didn't know how things would play out. I couldn't even imagine all the consequences. But I walked out of that boardroom knowing I'd done the right thing, letting justice and the facts decide what happened next. The ensuing days were some of the longest of my career. Whispers swirled through the office. People eyed each other warily. Alliances and old friendships re-evaluated in the light of what had happened. There was a thorough investigation. Lauren was eventually interviewed, confronted with incontrovertible proof. Her response was muted disbelief, quiet at first, then shock as she realized there was no escaping the evidence. Ultimately, she handed in her resignation, and the firm moved quickly to mend its reputation, re-establish trust among staff, and reassure our shaken clients. But my journey to find the truth hadn't just changed the firm. It shifted something fundamental inside me, too. I had learned more about people, power, and resilience in a few brutal months than I had in years of law school or the early days of my career. New York still thundered outside my window with its usual cacophony, but I felt older, a little hardened, maybe, and certainly less likely to hand over my trust so freely. And yet, I was also proud. I hadn't just uncovered a betrayal, but had survived it, forging myself into someone stronger and unexpectedly wiser. There were apologies and after-action meetings, far too many cups of coffee, and eventually, new cases to handle. Amanda, Mason, and Anita stayed by my side, and together, we began the slow, necessary work of rebuilding not just our caseloads, but the culture of trust in our firm. Looking back, the lesson was unmistakable. Every betrayal carried its own kind of education, but the price was always steep. I had paid it, willingly, for the sake of the truth. And as I faced new days, new challenges, and new cases, I carried that hard-earned knowledge forward, vowing never again to let ambition, politics, or misplaced loyalty blind me to what really mattered. Turning the tables. In every lifetime, there's a singular moment when you realize that your narrative isn't being written by fate alone. Sometimes you seize the pen yourself and, trembling, begin to rewrite the story, even if the pages are already splattered with betrayal and loss. For me, that moment was the long and sleepless week after the evidence against Lauren was laid bare on my desk, and I understood that I stood at a crossroads. Accept defeat and let the wound become a permanent scar, or marshal all my resolve and turn the tide in ways nobody at the firm could have anticipated. Here's the real truth about fighting back, especially in a world as cold and calculating as a Manhattan law firm. It's less about vengeance and more about clarity. When I finally accepted that Lauren, my mentor and friend, had chosen to risk both of our livelihoods for her own ambition, it didn't just shatter my trust, it challenged my entire sense of self. I'm not wired for easy surrender. I can't simply forgive or forget. That stubborn, relentless drive so many warned me about since college, suddenly became my greatest asset. The earliest hours of my fight were the loneliest. Manhattan, with its unending towers and blinking city lights, felt somehow off-limits to me. Every glass facade reflecting secrets, every subway car full of anonymous faces, none of whom knew I just had my heart ripped out at work. My apartment, usually my safe haven, became a headquarters. Post-it notes covered the walls, timelines were mapped out with red twine, and empty coffee mugs multiplied on every surface. I told almost no one what was happening, not even my parents, who called every Sunday, cheerfully oblivious to their daughter's predicament. Admitting defeat or sharing my pain would make it real. Instead, I poured my energy into gathering, organizing, and strategizing. Every phase was deliberate. I methodically recreated the entire timeline of the case, charting out when Lauren's betrayals intersected with key developments, when leaks began to appear, and the financial motivations that might have lured her away. I double-checked digital breadcrumbs, then sought out new ones. Often, that meant endless evenings, squinting at spreadsheets and logs, half-starved and exhausted, but driven by a sense of purpose that I can only describe as defiant hope. My loyal allies, Amanda, Mason from IT, and Anita, became my unofficial war council. I couldn't have survived without them. Amanda kept my spirit from imploding. Mason explained the subtleties of access logs and digital forensics, his dry humor the only sparkle in those dark days. Anita lent a sharp editor's eye, spotting patterns in the data that I might have overlooked. Knowing I wasn't entirely alone gave me the courage to keep moving forward. At some point, it stopped being just about me or even just about what Lauren had done. It became about justice, about defending the integrity of a place I'd worked so hard to belong to, about showing the people who counted me out that I wasn't just another casualty of office politics, an ambition gone sour. But strategy in these situations is a delicate dance. One wrong move and it's over. Your credibility evaporates, your career tanks, and you become nothing but a cautionary tale whispered in office kitchens. So, we plotted every step with the same care as a chess grandmaster. First, I gathered irrefutable proof, badge access records, time-stamped emails, security camera footage, and hard copies of illegally accessed depositions. I composed a report, not in emotional terms, but as a litigator, scrupulously logical, anchored in evidence, anticipating every defense the opposition might mount. Amanda and Mason reviewed my findings in secret. Their silent nods told me I was ready. The next part was the hardest, presenting my findings to the partners. I scheduled my meeting for early Monday morning when the office was quiet and the partners hadn't yet been inundated by the day's battles. As I walked into the dark-paneled boardroom, briefcase in hand and heart pounding, I felt both exposed and unbreakable. For so long, I'd deferred to these men and women, shrinking under their experience and title. Now, I stood before them as a peer, determined not just to save herself, but to save something larger. "Thank you for meeting with me," I began, voice strong, eyes trained on the evidence folder. The weight of what I was about to do pressed against my ribs. I outlined my case methodically, laying out Lauren's betrayals with clinical precision and letting the facts speak for themselves. I anticipated rebuttals, fielded their skeptical questions, and, when challenged, remained as cool as icy pavement. Every point was airtight. The silence at the conclusion was profound. Disappointment, yes, but also understanding. They promised an internal investigation, emphasizing confidentiality at every turn. As I left that room, hands sweaty but spirit intact. I realized I had crossed a threshold. They would never look at me as merely a junior again. What happened next was a blur of procedures and emotions. A formal inquiry was opened immediately. HR and IT swept the digital trails clean for review, while the managing partners moved carefully to preserve both the truth and the firm's already bruised reputation. I returned to my regular caseload, but nothing about my days felt regular anymore. There were whispers when I entered the elevator, side glances in the break room, unasked questions in the eyes of colleagues who suspected but didn't know. More than once, I found myself doubting if I'd done the right thing. What if I'd missed some mitigating detail, some innocent explanation? But Amanda always reassured me, reminding me I'd done what was necessary, what was just. Lauren was called in quietly. She denied everything at first. Her voice cool, her eyes flat, her words so measured, it almost made me second-guess the evidence. Almost. But she couldn't argue with timestamps, surveillance footage, or the pattern of leaks matching her login credentials. Gradually, the denial gave way to resignation. When she left the office, it was with her shoulders hunched, a cardboard box in her arms, and the stiff silence of a woman who had destroyed her own future in pursuit of more power. The fallout didn't stop with Lauren's resignation. Suddenly, every relationship in the office was re-examined under a microscope. The trust we'd all casually taken for granted felt shaken to its roots. Some colleagues congratulated my tenacity, though their praise was always tempered with caution. After all, no one likes a reminder that such betrayal is possible in their own backyard. Others avoided me entirely, perhaps resenting the storm I'd unleashed, or worrying that my next crusade might expose their own secrets or missteps. Management scrambled to shore up morale. There were new protocols for document security, layers of oversight added to sensitive casework, and a surge in training seminars about ethics and integrity. I led a few of these myself. Awkward at first, but ultimately kind of liberating. I spoke about professional responsibility, about learning the hard way how critical it is to trust but verify, and how even the best intentions don't grant immunity from mistakes. My own transformation became a cautionary tale and, oddly enough, a spark of hope for others who'd been silenced or burned by the system. But turning the tables in this way came at a cost, one I'm still tallying, sometimes late at night as the city murmurs beyond my apartment windows. My faith in my fellow lawyers was forever altered. Mentorship, once a lifeline, became something I scrutinized with hesitation. New friendships, however, began to bloom in unexpected places. Anita, always there with a flash of insight and quiet loyalty. Mason, who started inviting me to his team's infamous trivia nights, where being both a techie and a lawyer was a competitive edge. Even Amanda, who confided that she had her own scars, her own stories of betrayal and resolve, and who became more of a soulmate than a supervisor. Personally, I learned how necessary courage was, not just for courtroom dramas, but for workplace realities. I discovered my own limits and, in smashing through them, found a wellspring of strength I barely recognized. That drive, once channeled solely into surviving billable hours and courtroom battles, became the force that let me redefine what success meant. Not titles or bonuses, but self-respect, clarity, and a willingness to stand alone if it meant standing for the truth. Looking back on that tumultuous period, I can almost chart the exact moment the narrative began to change. Not just for me, but for the entire firm. We had been jolted awake. Trust, so easy to take for granted in the early days, was now something we fought for, examined, and nurtured. Conversations became more honest. Junior associates came to me, tentatively at first, for advice on navigating complex alliances and learning from the chaos I had endured. Senior partners offered tentative olive branches, acknowledging that even the brightest stars could falter if left unchecked, if ambition went unmoored from principle. I became a different kind of attorney, not naive, not armored by cynicism, but wiser. I invested in mentoring, determined that new hires wouldn't have to stumble through the same darkness I did. We built systems of accountability, peer review committees, open forums for voicing concerns. The firm survived its crisis, bruised but transformed, and my role in that legacy is something I carry with equal parts pride and humility. It's strange how a single act of betrayal can, if faced head-on, yield something approximating redemption, not just for the wounded, but for an entire institution. Turning the tables wasn't about revenge or even vindication. It was about refusal, refusing to be a passive victim, refusing to let someone else's moral failure define my path, refusing to believe that the worst in people will always win. Now, when I cross the threshold into the office each morning, nerves twanging with equal parts anxiety and anticipation, I'm reminded of what it means to reclaim your own story. I see not just the ghosts of old mistakes, but also the bright, stubborn possibility of rewriting the rules. Success in New York never comes easy. Sometimes it means losing more than you ever intended, but it also means finding that you're stronger for the loss. I did not just survive my first great betrayal. I transformed it into the foundation of the career I had always dreamed of, but never quite imagined would be so hard-won or so deeply personal. The first lesson of life. Looking back, I can see that my first real lesson about trust and survival in this ruthless world didn't come from textbooks, mentors, or even the early victories in court. It came crashing down in the aftermath of betrayal, as I pieced together both my career and sense of self amid the fallout. There's an old saying that you never really forget your first heartbreak. Now, I know that's just as true for the lessons we take from loss as it is for love. This is the story of what I carried with me after facing the darkest moments of my young career. The things I wish I could have whispered to my fresh, out-of-law school self. For weeks, I walked into our marble-lined lobby with a new wariness, bags beneath my eyes, shoulders squared against the invisible weight of what I'd been through. At first, I was ashamed of the wounds left by Lauren's betrayal. My earliest instinct was to hide, to retreat from the bustling city that had always felt alive and promising. Manhattan's skyline, the one that used to fill me with optimism, now seemed as cold and unforgiving as the politics inside our firm. But in that quiet desperation, some new, steelier part of me began to take root. I learned to acknowledge the pain, examine it, and ultimately to let it change me for the better. Lesson 1. What you survive, you own. I used to think that resilience was just a matter of soldiering through, keeping your head down, swallowing the hard moments, and pushing ahead. But it's more than that. Adversity isn't just something that happens to you. If you're willing to truly face it, it becomes something you possess. I realized that my scars weren't marks of failure. They were proof of experience, and there was a power in owning my story. The nights I lay awake, replaying Lauren's betrayal, wondering how I'd missed the signs, were also the nights when I developed the grit I'd need to stay, not just afloat, but to lead. If you let them, your worst moments can sharpen you, not diminish you. Lesson 2. Trust is not blind. The hardest part was learning to trust again without letting cynicism define me. The legal world demands collaboration, and yet, real trust is a currency you only come to value once it's been violated. I started paying attention to the subtler cues in people. Who showed up for me when there was nothing to gain? Who listened instead of waiting their turn to speak? Who took responsibility for their missteps? I realized that trusting someone doesn't mean giving them unfettered access to your hopes and vulnerabilities. It means gradually building a ledger of small, consistent choices, both theirs and yours, until a foundation forms. Time and evidence, not just words, are what matter. Lesson 3. Knowledge of self is armor. In the wake of scandal, I found myself waking up every morning asking, who am I outside of this office? It wasn't always a pleasant answer. I was proud, but I could be naive, ambitious, but sometimes blinded by my need for affirmation. I knew I was fiercely loyal, sometimes to a fault, so I worked to balance these traits, to look at myself honestly, and in doing so, I realized that real strength isn't perfection, but self-awareness. My integrity, battered but intact, became the one thing I could always rely on, an armor against both external attacks and self-doubt. Every time I was tempted to shortcut the truth, to cover for someone else or myself, I heard that voice. Be honest, even when no one's watching. Lesson 4, the right allies change everything. In my darkest moments, Amanda and the others who stood by me were more than friends. They were lifelines. I learned to hold tight to these true allies, to reciprocate their loyalty with my own. I invested more time in supporting my trusted colleagues, and in return, our mutual trust became a kind of internal safety net. I also learned to recognize when alliances were transactional or shallow, letting go of the need to be liked by everyone. It's better to have a few honest voices in your corner than a legion of empty admirers. Lesson 5. Lead, even when you're terrified. Stepping forward with the evidence against Lauren, knowing it might make me a pariah, was the hardest thing I've ever done. It taught me that sometimes leadership means standing alone. It's about making the hard call, not because you're brave or sure, but because someone has to do what's right. Afterwards, I noticed that others, especially younger associates, looked to me for cues about how to handle pressure, confrontation, or even failure. I learned that the only thing worse than being afraid is letting that fear make you silent. You can't control the fallout, but you can control your choices. Lesson 6. Take pride, but stay humble. There's a razor-thin line between confidence and arrogance after you've survived something big. For a while, I feared that what set me apart might also set me above, that I'd risk becoming cold, or worse, unreachable. But real pride comes from humility, knowing you're strong because you've been weak, and capable because you've been lost. I made an effort to keep listening to those around me, opening myself to criticism and fresh perspectives. I realized that there's no single right way to move forward after betrayal. We each carve our own path, richer for the lessons, but never done learning. Lesson 7. Your story is still yours to write. I once thought my career would be a straight shot, a sequence of personal wins, peppered by the challenges all lawyers face. Instead, it's been more like crossing a minefield, with every setback forcing me to re-examine both my skill and my heart. And yet, what I've come to believe, what this whole experience taught me most, is that the story is still mine. No one can take away the agency you earn by getting back up. My optimism might be more tempered now, my boundaries clearer, my trust more hard-won. But I'm still in love with the city, the law, and even the risk that comes with embracing both. I wish I could say that, after all this, I became immune to disappointment, that the rest of my career was smooth sailing. That's not the case. Sometimes my old wounds ache, especially when I see echoes of my younger self in the wide-eyed new associates eager to belong. Sometimes I get angry still, or nostalgic for a time, when I didn't know how treacherous some waters could be. But I also feel grateful, truly, deeply grateful, for the pain I endured. It made everything that came after, every small victory, every genuine connection, every moment where I acted with courage instead of fear, mean 10 times as much. If I have any advice to offer to someone stepping through their first revolving doors in New York, it's this: nurture your ambition, but never let it become a weapon. Protect your heart, but don't turn it to stone. Learn to trust wisely, but never stop reaching for the good in people. And above all, when life knocks you down, which it will sooner or later, don't let the fall define you. Get up, own your story, and step forward, knowing that the hardest earned lessons will be the ones that carry you furthest. Because in the end, surviving your first battle scars is less about who hurt you and more about who you choose to become after the dust settles. My New York, my law career, and my sense of self are all a little rougher around the edges now, but also sharper, more real, and, in their own strange way, more beautiful for the lessons carved into every step of the journey.